Hi everyone, my name is Sal Iversano, and I am making a video to put my 2 cents into the whole moon landing hoax theory. I am going to talk about something a lot of people don't talk about, which is the audio side of the whole thing. Everybody says, when they want to say that the moon landing broadcasts were fake, they look at the pictures and they point at the videos and say, look at this, look at that, look at the other thing. I've noticed nobody talks about the audio side. And because if everything that was seen was faked in the studio, then everything that was heard would be faked in the studio. Correct? So I'm here to lay out how difficult that would have been. Now, for the record, I don't believe that the moon landings were staged in a studio. I don't believe it because the claims always come from people on the outside. It's always somebody who worked for a company that was contracted to NASA, who saw something, and because they saw that, then obviously nobody could go to the moon, so they obviously had to stage it in a studio. They had to get like a Hollywood production team to come and pulled off this whole entire hoax in the studio. And there are all sorts of mistakes in the video that prove that this was faked. But if this was done by a professional Hollywood production crew, those mistakes wouldn't be there. Everybody talks about the shadows because of the lights from multiple light sources, like a studio lighting rig. But a professional studio lighting crew knows how to light a set so there are no shadows. So I don't buy that. And as I said, it always comes from somebody on the outside. Nobody in all this time has come forward and says, yes, it was faked. I know it was faked because I was the one in the costume. I was the one running the camera. I was the one who lit the set. I brought coffee and donuts to the set that day. And after all this time, it's been 49 years, after all the books that have been written about this and all the television shows, anybody who had hard evidence, a document, a picture, something, what I'm about to lay out for you is going to show that there would have been piles and piles and piles of audio tapes laying around. Anybody with some kind of hard document that proves that this was fake would stand to make a lot of money, okay? And the fact that in this 49 intervening years, nobody has made a serious run at that big payday proves to me that it's all talk. So, that's how I feel going forward. Now, as to me, myself, as I said, my name is Sal. I'm a musician. And like most musicians today, you kind of have to have a do-it-yourself attitude. I record myself live performing. When I perform live, I record myself all the time. I have a home studio set up. Also, I have a degree in audio production from my community college, Brookdale Community College. So it's with that experience and that education that I am making this presentation for you. I'm using all of that, everything I've learned to lay all this out for you. Now, what I got started with was on the NASA YouTube page. There is an official video, like the official broadcast that was sent out from NASA to the big three networks the night that happened. And the thing, I sat, I've been listening to this over and over again. Now, first of all, it's 3 hours long. So there is that. And when you start listening to it, one of the first things you hear are people talking. So if this was all being faked in a studio and people were talking, that meant a script had to have been written. So if the theory is that NASA went to Hollywood and got a production team to make this, they would have gone to Hollywood, and probably hired a staff writer from one of the big 3 networks to write their script for them. And once you start hearing the dialogue, you start realizing that a lot of research must have went into this. You know, a staff writer, somebody who was writing for scripts for Brady Bunch, Hee Haw, Love American Style, Marcus Welby, they would not have thought to have written lines like, Roger, you should have VHF AOS with the LM right about now. VHF LOS will be about 40 minutes, 15 seconds. That wouldn't occur to just somebody, you know, writing scripts for ABC, NBC, or CBS, which means a lot of research needed to go into this script. Somebody would have had to have sat down with the folks at NASA. They would have had to have gotten caught up on all the NASA jargon. They would have had to have sat down with these folks and said, okay, if you were going to send them out there, what were they going to do? You know, a lot of work would have went into the script before anybody started typing. Now, also on the internet, I found a website that had a transcript of what was said, and I copied and pasted that into a Word document just to see what it would look like if it was all just typewritten. And it comes out to about 29 pages. So that's 29 pages of very, very heavily researched dialogue. Now you have to get that to your cast. Now, let me say right now, I know there are folks out there who believe that anybody having anything to do with NASA is an actor already. I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm moving forward with the idea that the script was given to military pilots, engineers, and so on. So now these people would all be handed scripts. Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had the most amount of dialogue. Buzz Aldrin has 15 pages, Neil Armstrong has 13 pages, Bruce McCandless has 9 pages, Michael Collins, Richard Nixon, and all the other fellows you hear from for Mission Control, they have 1 page each. And you give them that script for a few weeks, then you get them into a studio. And this is where it gets kind of crazy, because, as I've said before, I'm moving along with the assumption that these are military pilots and engineers who probably would find a recording studio an intimidating environment. Okay? Then there's also the fact that this is 1969. This all has to sound like it's being done through the little headset mics that you see people doing on television. But in 1969, there are no inline sound effects. There's nothing in a soundboard that you could turn on that does this. People had to be creative in 1969. And I had no idea how this would have been done. I looked around on the internet. I tried emailing some people at, Skywalker Ranch. They never got back to me. I looked and I checked on who did sound for, the original Star Trek series and emailed this one. I finally got an answer from a fellow named Ralph M. Miller. He told me one way they used to do this back then, because you've heard this effect in you hear this effect in other things back then, other movies, other television shows. This fella, Ralph M. Miller, says one way was to use a speakerphone. Give the actor a speakerphone, and then you put a microphone in front of the speaker. Another way is to use walkie-talkies. Have one actor speak into the walkie-talkie, have the other one mic'd. So, we are taking people who would find a recording studio an intimidating environment, handing them pages and pages of dialogue, sitting them down in front of a phone or a walkie-talkie and saying, okay, make me believe it. Because it's not enough to just say the lines. People listening have to believe it. You have to buy it. Getting that done would be a huge accomplishment. It would take... Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong probably would have been sitting in a recording studio for days, just running the dialogue over and over and over again, getting it right, just sitting there getting comfortable enough to just make it believable. You know? It would have taken a lot of time. Everybody would have taken a lot of time. Probably the only person who would have banged out his part would have been Richard Nixon. Because if you listen to what he says, it's basically a speech.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. That would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the sea of tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, men with interest and a curiosity, and men with a vision for the future. Honor for us to be able to participate here today.
And thank you very much, and I look forward, all of us look forward to seeing you on the Hornet on Thursday. Look forward to that very much, sir.
He probably could have banged that out in 2 takes. Maybe the fellas in the control room said, Mr. President, you got time to give us one more just for the heck of it? He would have been done in a couple hours. Everybody else, it could have been like pulling teeth. It would have taken a long time. By the time everybody's done, you have piles and piles and piles of tapes. This is done on reel-to-reel tapes. You have piles like this that somebody has to go through and decide which takes are the best. Somebody has to sit through everything and decide which take of Neil Armstrong saying, "Yeah, thanks, Buzz," is the best one. Somebody had to do that. Then all of that stuff needs to be edited together onto one tape. In the days of reel-to-reel tape editing, that's a lot of work. And thanks to a fellow named Dr. Bruce Whistler at Clemson University, I have this little clip showing exactly how tape splicing was done on reel-to-reel tape back then.
So we're going to try and do an actual tape splice here, and I don't have much in the way of old music tapes that I really want to cut. So I've got a spoken word tape here. This is a local NPR radio broadcast from 1998, and it's a Clemson faculty member. The radio show was called The Plant Professor, and in this one he's talking about termite damage to structures. So And you can also see with the professional tape machine, I can mark what it calls a 0 point, and then I can get it to go back to that by hitting the 0 button. So I've already pulled up a spot here, and it's where he hesitates and says and I'm going to see if I can edit that out. So let's listen to it.
Structure to the vertical building structure, and we
okay, so he says vertical building structure. So I'm going to try to cut out the so we get vertical building structure, and might be a little bit of issues with his inflection from word to word, but let's see if I can make this happen. Okay, so I'm going to try to stop the tape right where he says vertical. So play it again.
Structure to the vertical.
And he's got a breath before which might be a little bit of a problem as well.
Structure to the vertical.
Okay. Now, I'll do what we call rocking the reels to try to find my spot. Turn my volume up here. So I think that's the end of the word vertical. And right there, I think that's his breath. So the end of vertical, the start of the breath. All right, so I'm going to make a mark on the tape, remembering that this one is my playback head, so that's where I'm actually hearing it. Back in the day, we normally used colored pencils for this, and I also want to be careful and not get any ink, not touch the head itself. Oh yeah, it's making a fine mark on the tape. I can see that okay. And now I'll pull that down into, on the tape machine we have built in here this splicing block. And you see in the splicing block I can make a straight cut or two different diagonals. I'm going to go with the 45-degree diagonal. So for those of you that do this kind of thing in modern digital audio workstations, that would be like having a crossfade. And it's good to have a clean, sharp razor blade, and I got a very good cut there. All right, now this is going to be tricky. I'm taking out very little here. Okay, I think that's and then after that we should have building. Yeah, that's a strong syllable, that consonant B. So you can see this takes a little practice to get good at this, but I think right there is the word building. So I'm going to put just a little space in front of it, so as to leave a little space between his words. End of and building, I think, starts right there. Now I get my pen. Notice I have to keep the tape taut since this end of it's loose. I'm having to use one hand to keep the tape taut so that it stays put on the playback head, and then I make my mark, and again bring it down to the splicing block. All right, so there we go. That short piece of tape is hopefully a breath. So I'll lay that aside. And now we'll bring the two ends together. And I got a nice clean cut. The ends are butting up very nicely. I haven't tried to buy any splicing tape for a while, but I know it has still been available. As you can imagine, there's very little demand for it. Alright, and the splicing tape is manufactured to be slightly narrower than the audio tape that we're putting it on. And then I use my fingernail to get it all pressed down smoothly, get all the air bubbles out of it. Alright, so we'll get things pulled back into place here. And I'll rewind just a little bit and cross my fingers.
Structure to the vertical building structure.
Oh, that's great. So a slight pause, but it sounds pretty natural. I was afraid that the inflection leading from one word to the next, or the space between them, wouldn't be natural, but I think I lucked out and got this one pretty well. So it's vertical building. The cut is right between those two words.
Transition from the very horizontal soil structure to the vertical building structure.
So now you've got the dialogue down. It's all been spliced together. Now, getting this far would have been a huge accomplishment. This could have taken weeks. Now you have to mix in the sound effects. You have to make it sound like, you know, stuff is happening in space. One of the first, you have to go now. You need to be working with the multi-track recorder. Multi-track recorders, commonplace. 1969 cutting-edge facilities like you know, Electric Ladyland and Abbey Road probably had 16-track multi-track recorders. So like any place would have like at least an 8-track multi-track recorder, which would be all you really need to get this done. Now, when I start listening to these recordings, and I listen for like sound effects and how they would have been done, one thing I notice after somebody talks, you hear a little beep. I'm calling those comm beeps, because why not? One thing I noticed during the time when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are on the surface, the only time you hear a comm beep is after Bruce McCandless says something.
I'd like to evaluate the various paces that a person can traveling on the surface. I believe I'm out of your field of view. Is that right now, Houston? That's affirmative, Buzz. You're in our field of view now. You do have to be. All right, you do have to be rather careful to keep track of where your center of mass is. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 paces to make sure that you've got your feet underneath you.
That goes on until Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin get back. They leave the surface of the moon and get back into the ship, the Lunar Excursion Module. And when they hook into the Lunar Excursion Module's communication system, there's comm beeps after what they say.
Houston, it's Tranquility. How do you read? Tranquility Base, this is Houston. Loud and clear. How are us? Loud and clear. We're in the process of switching over to LEMCOM here. Roger.
Now, if this was faked, somebody had to think about that. Somebody, the person mixing the effects, would have had to have looked at the script and said, I'm not going to put comm beeps on this dialogue until this part of the story. Somebody would have had to have thought of that. There's also the action of actually getting the beeps into the recording. One way could have been making a tape loop, a beep tape loop, and somebody could just sit and push play and then pause, play, pause, play, pause, play. Or they could find some kind of machine that makes the beep sound. But you have to remember, this is all done in real time. That would mean somebody would have to sit by the soundboard listening to the dialogue, and every time Bruce McCandless finishes say something, they have to push a button and put the beep in. They have to sit there for the whole 29 pages of dialogue and listen and put the beep in. And if they screw up and get sloppy, they got to start all over again. That takes a lot of work. Another thing about the Bruce McCandless dialogue is there's a lot of echo after it. After he says something, almost all the time you hear it echoing. A few moments later.
Neil and Buzz, for your information, your consumables remain in good shape. Out. In good shape. Roger.
And that echo is usually cut off anytime you hear somebody else speaking. Now, in order for that to have had to have been done, somebody would have had to have made a tape of just Bruce McCandless's dialogue. Made a tape of just that. And then sat there with the tape player, with the tape of just his dialogue, and in real time sat there and hit play every time he says something, like wait a second later, and hit play. And then when you listen, you'll notice if somebody else says something, you can't hear him. The conversation, the line doesn't stop. It's not like he stops talking and then starts talking again. The echo simply stops, which means that they probably needed two people. You probably had somebody to push play on the machine. Then somebody had to either, maybe if they got lucky, this particular machine had a mute button on the channel, so they could hit mute, or somebody had to work a fader. Like, this one pushes play, and oh, he talks fade out, fade out, fade out. Somebody would have had to have sat there and done that through all of that dialogue. And then, as you listen more into the videos, you get halfway through, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are setting up the experiments on the lunar surface, you start hearing people from Mission Control talking to each other. You hear the folks who are in charge of the experiments. They need to see how this is done. They need to say, oh, these guys need to do this, these guys need to do that. You hear the flight surgeon saying things like, Neil Armstrong's heart rate's a little high. Tell him to take it easy for a few minutes. With the amount of drinking water they have, they should only be out there for so much longer. The thing is, though, when you hear these people from Mission Control speaking, there is a new kind of bassy hum behind everything they're saying. Now, in order for that to have been done, that means somebody would have had to have come up with a way to make that hum, either find a machine or something, some way of making a machine make that hum and record it, and then take all the dialogue from everybody at Mission Control, all of their dialogues would have had to have been recorded separately and mixed with that hum. And then that tape, that's another tape by itself that had to have been put in real time into the mix. And if you listen, the hum stops and starts with the way people, with those people talking.
Reflector
Yeah,
is
you fly unit. Is that 15 minutes on water? That's a firm.
installed and the bubbles level.
That was based on the last update we had.
The
We're still
alignment
running to
appears to be good.
Roger.
Neil, this is Houston. Roger out.
So again, somebody had to think about that. Somebody had to say, well, we're going to hear these people talking. Now, they're supposed to be in mission control. This is someplace we haven't heard from. We have to make the listener aware that this is something they haven't heard before. We haven't heard from this place before. So let's come up with this hum loop behind everything. Somebody had to think about that. Somebody had to record the dialogue separately to be mixed with the hum loop and then add it in at this part of the story. A lot of work. So now I'm pretty sure after this point you've got everything recorded, you have everything mixed. I'm pretty sure this is the point at which you say, okay, as the audio producer, I am done, and I hand this to the director to sync it to the video that probably can't be made. So there you have it. If all of this audio was faked in a studio, it would have been a huge effort. It would have taken weeks. And this final product, basically it'd be a work of art. This would be something beautiful. So, this wouldn't be something thrown together. If, this visual, the what was done on the set was slapped together so poorly that you could tell everything is all wrong, how come the audio side? This is a work of art. This is beautiful. The sound effects bring the listener along and show the listener where they are in the storyline and introduces new places. This is done very well. I just don't buy that, this was something slapped together. Don't buy it. And that's my take on all this now. Anybody who was around in 1969, worked in audio production, can kind of, correct me on any of the tech things I got wrong. Feel free. And, I'm sure everybody will have a lot to say. But I just thought I'd throw this in. It's my 2 cents. My name is Sal Aversano, and thanks. Roger.